Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and pull up our question of the day, which is vertical spreads, the good, the bad, the ugly. And
Mm.
so my question to you first is, when I hear spreads,
Mhm.
the term that I've heard the most is calendar spreads and vertical spreads.
Mhm.
Are there any other types of spreads, or are those kind of the two? And then what is a vertical spread
Mhm.
in that sense?
Yeah, there definitely is, another one, and it's the one that I like the most, and it's called the diagonal spread. So it's a historical term back in the day, right? When you looked at the options board, when you were trading on the floor, they had these big signs that, when you had an option listed, you had the different, um, you had the different dates along the column headers of this like big giant display. So you had all the different expiration dates along the headers, and then you had all the strike prices along the row, headers, and then you had the prices of the individual options in the grid in before. And so what option traders would do is if they wanted to have the same expiration date but different strike prices, that would create a vertical picture, and you could circle the two options you wanted, and that would be a vertical spread. That would be the two options, and you would calculate the difference between the strikes and the difference between the going prices of those, and that's your vertical spread. If you wanted a horizontal or calendar spread, you'd go horizontal, and that would get the same strike price, different expiration dates, right? So the two options that make the spread are the same strike price, different expiration dates. So if you can imagine this big board with expiration dates along the columns and down the rows are the strike prices. This is how the option traders used to create vertical and horizontal spreads. And then, of course, diagonal is where you would have different strike prices, different expiration dates, right? And so that would create your diagonal spread. And you have two different synthetic variants, right? You have debit and you have credit spreads. They actually wind up being the same thing when you do the math. But one is just, you receive a credit and you hope that by the end of the trade, it, you know, decays to zero. So maybe you get a dollar credit up front, and then you want this trade to go to zero. Whereas the debit spread, you may decide that you buy this thing, it debits your account by $4, and you're hoping that it grows to $5 by the time it expires. It's still a dollar profit, but it's just, do I get the money up front and hope that it expires worthless, or do I pay some money up front and I hope that it actually appreciates versus depreciates in value? So vertical spreads are very popular. They're probably more popular than calendar spreads or diagonal spreads. In fact, I had somebody tell me just yesterday, "Hey, I'm really good at credit spreads." And I said, "Would that be credit vertical spreads?" I kind of knew the answer already, and she said, "I think so." I said, "Same expiration date, different strike prices?" "Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a vertical spread." So some people, they get confused on the terminology because you can have credit and debit spreads on all three of the variants: horizontal calendar, vertical, or diagonal. But most people are talking about vertical spreads. They're very popular. They have great reward potential, but the bad part about them is they also have pretty great risk potential. And of the courses that I've taken, um, most of the folks that teach about vertical spreads, they either don't know themselves about the whole risk component of them, or they just don't cover it very well. I've only, seen a couple of courses out there that are for just, off the shelf courses that actually explain the risk involved with a vertical spread. But if you think about it, like if I look at a chart for, um, I'll just pull up a ticker. Um, let's talk General Motors. That's one of my faves, right? You look at this chart on General Motors, and maybe you do a spread that's maybe you were thinking about doing a spread that's 29.30. Those are the two different strike prices, and you put a spread there. Just understand that the idea is that the symbol would stay below $29 and this thing would profit. But if the candidate goes above 30, you lose everything. So it's very easy. Like, for instance, anybody who was in the 29.30 um, vertical spread up until 3 days ago, you were doing fine. And then all of a sudden, overnight, with GM jumping above $30, you all of a sudden were wiped out. And vertical spreads are the one option strategy that I have had the most people come to me and say, "Hey, I learned how to trade vertical spreads and I was doing really well for the first 9 months of this year. I was making like double digit returns every month. They were coming off, without a hitch, and then something happened in month 10, and not only did I lose all the gains I made in the first 9 months, but I lost half of my initial investment. And my wife doesn't wanna speak to me, and we had to mortgage the house, right? You have no idea, Sip, if I had, like, a dollar bill for every time I heard that exact story because of vertical spreads, I mean, we'd all be millionaires right now because people just don't know how to evaluate risk, and they wind up overextending themselves in vertical spreads, not knowing how much risk they've taken on. And then, literally, in the release of a dividend, they're bankrupt. They have no more money left. And so my key thing, that's the bad and the ugly of vertical spreads. The key is make sure you size your positions appropriately, right? Make sure, if you do the same analysis that I teach my program participants, which is, calculate how much risk is in the position itself. And in the case of a vertical spread, calculate 100% risk that you could lose it all. And then reverse engineer to how much of your portfolio you would like to risk in that one given trade. I usually tell my program participants to risk no more than 4% of your portfolio in any one given trade. So if you could lose the whole thing and you want to limit your loss per position to 4%, guess what? The position can only be 4% of your portfolio. You can't put in half your portfolio into a single trade. If you put half of your portfolio into a single trade and it goes against you, you're going to lose half of your portfolio. So make sure when you're doing vertical spreads, you size them appropriately for the amount of risk that you're taking on, which is your whole investment. Vertical spreads, you have to calculate that you're going to lose it all if it goes against you. So that's the key, Sip. That's what a lot of people don't do. And the reason why I personally, only do vertical spreads here and there is because if you think about it, if each position is 4%, or I actually, for my own portfolio, limit it to just 2%, in order to have my portfolio invested in vertical spreads, I have 50, 50 simultaneous positions going on simultaneously in order to have my whole portfolio working for me. 50. You know how crazy that would be to try to watch 50 positions at the same time? That's definitely not my way to trade. I got better things to do. I like the easier approach. So I'm actually all about legging into these diagonal spreads, creating a much broader range bound strategy, allowing folks, allowing less risk per position. And therefore, I could put more of my portfolio into each position and therefore not have to manage so many simultaneous positions. But sometimes the vertical spread has its calling. And we'll be talking about a particular candidate that I'm using some vertical spreads on in a few minutes. But there is its place.